talk today about URLs and the relationship between a URL and an HTTP request. So I have a URL here and I've colored it in a little bit. This is the URL for an imaginary page on example.org, and we can see the different bits of the URL. We've got the HTTP part here, which is the protocol that we're going to use, the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. We have example.org, which is the domain name of the server that we're going to send this request to. And then we have this part here, which is the URL, the path in the URL. And in fact, even this part here has some different subparts, and I'll talk about those in a second. So the first thing we're going to do in order to respond to this URL, and let's say we typed this into the address bar in our browser, the first thing we're going to do is understand the protocol, and we're going to make a connection to example.org in order to make a request. And because we just typed it in, it's going to be a GET request. So let me start constructing my request here, and let's just make that a bit bigger. Okay, so we're going to do a GET request, and we've opened up a connection to the server. We're going to do a GET request. Now, what are we going to do a GET request for? Well, we take the bit of the URL that's after the domain name there, and that really is the main the thing that we're going to be asking for. Except, and you see I've colored it in here, we actually have two parts to this. The first part is well, there's three parts to this. Okay, the first part is the page name, so the slash page, that's the path that will be passed in. The second part is called the query string, so the question mark, and then Q is 19, ampersand, X is 3. That's two form variables. So Q, the form variable with the value 19, and X, a form variable with the value 3. And then the last bit there is hash BFG, which is called a fragment identifier, and in fact we don't ask for that. Okay, so we don't send that along in the request. That is actually handled locally by the browser. We'll talk about that in a second. So we're going to ask for that URL, and then we're going to say HTTP 1.1, and then we're going to say we need the host and example.org. So that's the minimal HTTP request that we're going to send through to example.org. Now the host part, we're telling it which host we're requesting. The reason for that is that we might be running many web servers on a single machine, and so unless we actually say which one we're actually asking for, the machine won't know how to actually answer that request. So this is how we turn the URL into a request. Now that will give us back some stuff, and this here is then the key to how we actually use this hash BFG bit on the end of the URL, because that is a fragment identifier and refers to a part of the page that I want to look at. Let's go and look at my notes to illustrate that. If we look at the view of HTML page and then click on versions of HTML, you'll see that the URL here includes a fragment identifier there, which is hash title. Okay, so what that means is, and you see that in clicking on that, I've actually jumped down to the middle of the page, or if I click on the first one, it's title 0, I've jumped down to the About HTML section, so from there down to there. And if we go and look at this, inspect it, you can see that inside that page in the markup there's an ID with the value title 0, and so that is what the browser has done. It's retrieved this HTML page, the request that we sent. If we go and have a look for it, I'll just refresh that. The request that was sent was just for HTML.html. The title 0 bit was only used by the browser to jump down to and position the page around that one. So these are the parts of the URL and how they are transformed into, in this case, a simple GET request. The query string part becomes part of the request, but the fragment identifier part doesn't. Now, it's up to the server what it does with this request here, this page with a query string. The server has to decide how to actually answer that and resolve it, but it will return some resource to you, some value to you for your browser to render. So it's the basics of how a URL is turned into a GET request in your browser.